topic, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion, which is going to be extremely interesting and relevant for our work. So just wait for a minute and then we'll get started. Thank you everyone for being here today with us. Hello everyone, we're just giving a minute for people to come on board and we're gonna start very soon. Yeah, thank you. All right, so we've given the 2 minutes for everyone to come on board. Thank you so much for being here. Hello and welcome to the Zero Waste Europe live webinar. My name is Mariel Vilella and I'm the Director of Global Strategy at Zero Waste Europe. For those who don't know our organization, Zero Waste Europe is a Brussels-based NGO working on advocacy at the EU level, but also a network of organizations implementing zero waste strategies at national and local level across Europe. The Zero Waste Cities program coordinates the work that is done by Zero Waste Europe and its member organizations, helping accelerate the transition to a zero waste circular economy in Europe by supporting the implementation of effective local waste reduction and prevention strategies. As part of this program, we aim to capture and learn from the best zero waste practices from around the world. Today's Zero Waste Europe live webinar is the last in the series, where we have brought experts together to discuss key topics ranging from Europe's broken recycling system to the impact of single-use menstrual products. Today's webinar focuses on one of the most important discussions related to zero waste today. So without further ado, let's get into it. In recent years, we have seen a number of developments that would suggest decision makers recognize that waste incineration is incompatible with long-term climate goals. Yes, does this match with the reality on the ground? Are we still living through a time of waste incineration within a linear economy, or are we entering an age of decommissioning? This webinar will go into greater depth to answer these key questions. Why is waste incineration incompatible with a circular economy, and how is this becoming more recognized? Is waste incineration compatible with the increasing need for an adoption of climate-supportive carbon-neutral policies? What is happening at the European level to prohibit funding and support for increasing incineration capacity? What are the transition strategies available for municipalities to help move away from incineration? And our speakers today are William Shanks, a consultant with Eunomia, MEP Sirpa Pitikainen, Yannick Bach, the Climate, Energy and Air Pollution Program Coordinator at Zero Waste Europe, and Enzo Favoino, the Scientific Coordinator at Zero Waste Europe. So today, the webinar will hear each speaker present for about 7 to 8 minutes. And after each presentation, we will have 10 minutes for clarification questions. At the end of all the presentations, we will still have 30 minutes or so for a joint Q&A and discussion with all the speakers. And let me introduce very briefly the webinar tools. So we have a chat box. So it'd be great if you could introduce yourself using the chat function. We'd love to hear who is with us today. And for your questions, please submit them via the Q&A tool, which I will then pass to the speakers to save time. In this Zoom platform, we have capacity for 100 participants, so we're also streaming it on YouTube. So those joining via the YouTube, please submit the questions in the chat there. Right, so without further delays, let's start with this exciting discussion. with our first speaker. So our first speaker is William Shanks, consultant with Eunomia. Thank you, William, for being with us today. William is carbon and greenhouse gas emissions modeling specialist at Eunomia. He's an engineer by background. He's worked on several key waste carbon projects, like examining the impact of policy changes on residual waste compositions and novel technologies like waste to jet fuel. More broadly, Will is part of Eunomia's climate emergency team, whose work ranges from pushing for policy changes in the carbon offset space to helping local authorities set ambitious and clear net zero strategies. Thank you again, William, for being with us today. The floor is yours, so you can share your screen for your presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Marielle, and thanks for inviting me on today. Can everyone see that all right? And hear me all right? I'm going to assume yes.
Yeah, all good.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, as Marielle said, my name is Will Shanks. I'm a waste carbon modeler at Eunomia. Very excited to be here with you today, presenting some work we did looking at quantifying the impacts, the greenhouse gas impacts of incineration. Hopefully this will provide a little bit of context nicely for the rest of the presentations today. So let's jump straight in. I'm going to be telling you about a project we did for an environmental law NGO called ClientEarth, looking at the greenhouse gas impacts of incineration now and in 2035. That work actually looked at landfill as well, but that's going to be outside the scope of what we talk about today. So I'm going to talk about what the modeling and what the numbers tell us about incineration in a decarbonizing world and what kind of actions we're going to have to take to move towards net zero. Diving straight in, as I'm sure many people on this webinar know, European waste policy over the last 20 years or so has followed the waste hierarchy, which has diverted waste away from landfill and driven a large increase in waste being treated via incineration. This in turn has had greenhouse gas consequences, and this is what ClientEarth asked us to look into to quantify these greenhouse gas impacts, both today and in the future. Obviously, these plants are around for 30 years. We're in a world which needs to be moving towards net zero rapidly, so you need to look forward as well as today. We were asked to focus on the UK, which means UK waste composition, UK incineration facilities, and the UK energy context, which means, disclaimer, it was not designed to be used elsewhere in Europe or indeed elsewhere in the world. Just quickly, why did we look at 2035? Well, the UK is looking like it's committing to a 65% recycling rate by 2035. So that makes it a logical year along the pathway to 2050 to look at in the future. What did we actually study? We looked at 5 technology options spanning both landfill and incineration. Obviously, today we're concentrating on the latter. But on the landfill side, we looked at landfill without any form of pretreatment, alongside landfill where the waste is sorted and the recyclable materials are removed, with the remaining fraction being biostabilized, which essentially means, for those without experience in waste carbon modeling, that the aerobic degradation of the waste is accelerated. And basically what that means is that when you finally send it to landfill, it doesn't produce methane, methane being something we want to avoid because it's a very potent greenhouse gas. On the incineration side, there were 3 options we looked at. The first 2 involved no pretreatment of the waste, one of which was looking at what happens if the incinerator only produces electricity. The second one, looking at if the incinerator produces heat as well as electricity, combined heat and power, called CHP there. And the final option we looked at is how well does incineration perform in greenhouse gas terms if you pre-sort the waste and get those recyclables out and recycle them. So some background and key assumptions. As I said, we looked at 2 scenarios, one today and one in the future. It's critical to have a future-looking perspective here, but I've underlined one possible because we don't know exactly what's going to be happening in the future, which means that we have to make certain assumptions about the waste context, the composition, the energy systems. As I said before, it was specific to the UK. And finally, just a bit of explanation for people who perhaps don't have experience in modeling waste carbon. There are two key streams in the residual waste flow for landfill and incineration in terms of greenhouse gases. The first one is food waste, which, as I alluded to earlier, in a landfill tends to degrade and produce methane instead of carbon dioxide. Methane causes climate change more powerfully than carbon dioxide does. And so the amount of food waste in the residual stream is really important. The second one is plastic. Plastic today comes from oil in the ground. It effectively acts like a fossil fuel when you burn it in an incinerator. So similarly, the amount of plastic in the residual waste stream is really important. Just to explain the two scenarios, the today scenario in green is fairly self-explanatory. It reflects today's waste situation and energy system context, with today's residual waste composition and recycling rate of about 45%. And the energy system, reflecting today's energy system, which is electricity mostly produced by gas and some renewables, and heat mostly produced by gas. The reason that is important is because those are the technologies which incinerators are competing with. And so that's what you compare to on a carbon basis. The second scenario is more interesting, and this is where we had to make assumptions. Excuse me. We firstly assumed that the 65% recycling rate by 2035 would indeed be met. And then we had to make assumptions about how this would be met. This is one scenario of how it would be met. It's not the only one. We assumed that we would meet a 65% recycling rate via high food waste recycling and lower plastic recycling. And this assumption has knock-on effects for the composition of the waste which you're studying, meaning that proportionally there's more plastic in the residual waste stream and lower food waste, and that will tend to bias the results against incineration in climate change terms. Finally, we assumed that the electricity grid continues its aggressive decarbonization, while heat, the incineration would be competing with, decarbonizes more slowly, and the system is still dominated by natural gas. So what do the results actually look like? Well, this graph shows each of the 5 technology options I talked about, both today in green and in our 2035 scenario in orange. The first key thing to point out here is that we're not really interested at this stage in comparing landfill and incineration. What we want to look at here are the changes between now and 2035, so the differences between the green and orange bars, and also the impact of pretreatment. So we can see that landfill on the left performs essentially as it does today in 2035. Conversely, incineration is going to perform significantly worse in 2035 compared to today. And that is true for both electricity-only incineration and CHP incineration. The reason for this is the assumptions I was just talking about to do with the decarbonization of the energy system. Incineration, it doesn't make sense for incineration to be competing against exclusively renewables when compared to incineration competing against coal, for example. And that is the reason that it will perform much worse in 2035 than it does today. Moving over to the two situations on the right where pretreatment is introduced, as you can see, those bars are negative, meaning that the avoided emissions of recycling and energy generation, whatever there is of that, now outweigh the emissions of the treatment, meaning that pretreatment has had a massive impact, a massive beneficial impact in climate terms. And this graph shows just how stark it is, particularly in the 2035 scenario. The first reason for this in the incineration context is that we're no longer incinerating plastic. The second is that we're now maximizing our recycling. And so we're maximizing those avoided emissions which count towards our system in a beneficial sense. So very quickly, what does this mean for actions that should be taken? I will only touch on these. I've said before, we need to minimize plastic incineration, ideally not incinerate any plastic. We can do this by firstly, obviously, reducing residual waste, and secondly, increasing plastic recyclability and making it easier to actually extract the plastic from the residual waste stream before it gets incinerated. We obviously need to plan for the long term here. As I mentioned before, plants could still be in operation in 2050 in a world where we're supposed to be decarbonizing And so we need joined up thinking about capacity and total amounts of waste. Finally, don't commission incinerators on some future promise of CHP, because as I've shown, even in the case of CHP, incineration is going to be performing much worse in the future, or CCS, which I'm not going to go any further into in this presentation. But finally, we believe that there should be no landfill or incineration without pre-treatment. And this is really a question for policy, which I'm not going to dive into here. Thank you very much. That was very quick. I appreciate.
Thank you so much, William. Really, really good to have your research in the context of the UK, which I think it really, we can take a lot of insights into the wider context. And it's going to be really, really interesting to now, to follow up with the other presentations. I don't see any Q&A in the questions box, which then I will assume that, oh, yeah, I can see one now. So we have, we have now a bit of minutes for some clarifications questions. There is a question about the role for carbon capture. What do you think, William? Is there a role for carbon capture in the context that you explained?
That final caveat helps me out a bit. The role of this study is obviously not to comment on carbon capture and storage. And as a modeler, that generally falls outside of my remit. What I would say is that these results show quite clearly the enormous impact you can have with sorting, pre-treating residual waste, and the cost at which you do that is significantly lower than carbon capture and storage. So I don't think it's for me to say whether carbon capture and storage has a role to play, but it's not the only thing. I think these results really clearly indicate that we need to be pre-treating waste before we even contemplate carbon capture and storage.
Yes, thank you, William. And as Janek also pointed out in the chat, he's going to touch upon carbon capture and storage in his presentation. Great. So there's another question in the Q&A chat. It says, it seems that you did not look at incineration with CHP in combination with pre-treatment. Is there a reason for that?
So I've actually, thank you, that's a good question. I've actually, the results I've shown here were actually only a very small subset of all the scenarios and technologies we looked at. It's a fair point to say that we didn't look at CHP in this presentation. I can assure you that the overall conclusions, even with CHP, would not change, which is that pre-sorting and CHP would be better than pre-sorting and electricity only, but CHP without pre-sorting, shown by this graph here, are not enough in a decarbonizing world in the UK. Okay,
great. Thank you so much. All right, let's move on to the next speaker, as we have still a lot to do from the webinar today. So the next speaker is Sirpa Pietikäinen, MEP. Sirpa is a Finnish member of the European People's Party in the European Parliament since 2008. She's a former Finnish Minister of Environment from 1991 to 1995. Her career at the Finnish Parliament is extensive, ranging from the year 1993 to 2003. Within her work, she seeks to combine her two specialities, environment and economics. And at the European Parliament, Mrs. Pietikäinen is a member of the Economic and Monetary Affairs Committee and the Women's Rights and Gender Equality Committee, as well as a substitute member of the Environment, Public Health and Food Safety Committee. A graduate from the Helsinki School of Economics, Mrs. Pietikäinen has a master's in business and teaches university courses on negotiations, theory, and practices. She's active in several organizations, and her positions of trust include chairmanship of the Globe EU. Thanks so much, Sirpa, for being with us today. The floor is yours, so I'll leave it to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marielle, and thank you for inviting me to this important discussion. First of all, and that is on my PowerPoints, I don't know if you can show them, but if not, because there's only few ones, we can live very well without them, is the sheer fact that you know so well that we are consuming today already worth 1.5 planets worth resources, and that we would need at least 3 planets worth resources by year 2050 if we do not make a drastic change. So from 1 planet to over 3 planets. And that means that when we make the solutions, they need to be up to the scale of the challenge, not just linearly, slightly better. And this is the justification, what you always hear. Isn't it better that we incinerate the waste and we get at least the energy out of it instead of just burying them on the landfilling sites? And that is the next slide. We definitely do need to change substantially the scale of resource efficiency. And if you don't remember anything else from me, please do remember the fact that then we would need to increase the productiveness of materials up to 10-fold. That means with 1/10 of the resources, we would produce the same welfare for the end consumer, the same added value or the better for business to business, and better than existing competitiveness for businesses, because otherwise they won't success, and the growth for business and the society with the new terms. So instead of a material, it is dematerialization. And there you see the good old sustainability definitions that I know that are very dear to you. Okay, let's go then from here. Totally complete closed loops idea to our circular economy action plan. And here you can see what is actually produced, proposed by the Commission, and what was the Parliament's position. And now we come to the aching point. And the aching point is, I don't know why. It has been for ages, and it is in our member states. It's a different track and a group of the people discussing about circular economy. Then a different track of the people discussing about product policy. And then the waste people seem to be totally alienated in their world of their own. And they are very much dominated by the municipalities and this kind of a linear, let's make things slightly better. I know that there are quite a number of huge developments and great people and great ideas, but if you take it overall as a mass, they are very conservative, very slow to move, and very gradually linearly moving, and not even close to factor 10, but doing things at least slightly better. And this is the big fight. Are we going to use any RRF, the famous recovery funds, to believe it or not, to fund new incineration capacity in Europe, where we would need to have only 1/10, even a bit less, left as waste? Because if you have a circular economy, you do not have waste. And that comes to the product policy that is the leading crux at the moment, and that came very strongly by the Parliament. And this is we are anticipating a big fight in the Parliament too, and in the member states. So please push the governments, the national parliaments, and the European Parliament. We need to design out of the waste, not to produce whatever we happen to produce, and then to wonder how you can circulate a package with hazardous materials and 100 different kind of composite ingredients, and then you get this kind of a mess, and you say, well, I give up, there's nothing else safe enough to treat this material except the incineration. And this means the extension of the eco-design directive, because this is where we can deal with the imported goods and packing. And this is what I would like to underline, the packing that is imported in the EU too. And you would need to have reflected the cascading use or the waste hierarchy principle as a product eco-design hierarchy. First, everything should be upgradable, so make it better after the use. If not possible, it should be reusable as such and repairable. It should be modular, so that you can use or you can repair and you can use the parts. And it should be only after then reused as material on the highest level, as we know, as the PET bottles are sort of circulated, so back to the same material. And then comes the rest of the waste hierarchy. And if that would be comply or explain model, so it would be the burden of the proof for those ones who produce and import the goods, we really could get the hands on the issue. Plus then, as you know, the early obsolescence and the planned obsolescence of the goods. So if we can't prevent the production of the waste, only the and there comes the problem of the whole waste policy and waste directive and waste people talking about waste, because it takes sort of a pre-given that the amount of waste is existing and growing, and that you just need to deal with that, and not that it should be only 5% of the existing amount actually after 30 years. And that would be, according to my studies, totally possible if it just would want it. And then, of course, there's the take the opportunities, and of course there are the challenges with the digitalization of a lot of energy consumption. But it is the product passport, so you know what is inside the products and how to sort of remanufacture them. And it is the service economy and repair economy. And there you have the sort of the areas where you would see the biggest challenges and possibilities, like cars and everything being sort of a modular. The benches go to bench manufacturers, and batteries to batteries, and so on. You know the story. And this is the big thing, and this is our concentration, and this is what the Parliament is demanding on its position on circular economy action plan. And this is what we are wanting also from the Commission to come up and not to shy away. And what we want, and there I will conclude, because probably I've used my time already, haven't I? Is that we would need to go here, actually, the challenges we haven't tackled. Because if we want to put these targets in place, as I said, we would need to have, as I mentioned, eco-design, but we would need to tackle with the chemicals, because this is one of the biggest obstacles of reuse and recycling. And the chemical strategy is not even getting close there. We would need to have binding targets with sanctions for member states. And this is what we are asking the Commission to come up, because nothing seems to happen without them in the member states. We would need to have indicators, and I proposed, but unfortunately it is not very clear in the Parliament's position, but it is in there, that we should in recycling have 3-point metering on the point where you collect, on the point where it enters on recycling, and then the third is on the point you actually reuse or remanufacture. So you could see the big differences between the collection and really reuse of the materials and remanufacturing, because if we are frank, still quite a big number of recycling is that just a scam and ends up on landfilling or incineration. We should phase out landfilling and incineration. because, and definitely not to build any single capacity on incineration, because then when you get that sort of a highway there, it's very difficult to prevent, to create new loops on reusing, because of course there's the huge demand on material on the sites and on the plants, and this is going to be one of the biggest biggest challenges on the future, and compensation and overcompensation of closing them down, and then phase out all the harmful subsidies on that side. Then last but not least, and now we do not have time to discuss it, but please be very alert on chemical recycling and the other new forms of reuse, because there's a lot of good ideas where you really could do molecular recycling from plastics to identical plastics. But the big part is under the petroleum industry, and just creating fossil fuels or incinerating the materials. And actually this is just greenwashing the term itself. Thank you for listening, and always happy to continue the exchange of opinions and discussion with you.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Pitikainen, to be here with us, and thank you so much for bringing your perspective on from the policy side. Do we have any clarification questions for Sirpa? Not so far, but we can pick up on the discussion after all the presentations, and we will definitely have time then to talk more. Great. All right. So we're going to move on then to the next speaker. That's going to be Yannick Bach. Yannick is the Climate, Energy and Air Pollution Program Coordinator at Zero Waste Europe. He joined Zero Waste Europe in August 2015. And as the coordinator for this program, the Climate, Energy and Air Pollution Program, Yannick leads on the climate and energy policy advocacy work towards EU institutions. Previously, he worked for Friends of the Earth Europe, where he coordinated fundraising efforts on behalf of Friends of the Earth Europe and its 6 programs. And before that, he worked for Justice and Environment, where he provided leadership for the development of strategic partnerships. He holds a master's on environmental sciences and policy from Central European University and a postgraduate degree in charity marketing for Cass Business School. Thank you so much, Yannick, for being with us. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Maria. Just to be sure, you can see my slides, right? Yeah, yes. The full slides, not the, okay. Great. Okay, so thank you very much. I'm just going to build on some of the things that Sirpa has just told us and give some little further information on where we are with the EU policy landscape in terms of supporting transition away from incineration. Yeah, just a second. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Okay, so it's going to be a short presentation. So I'll try to do my best to. I'm going to go through talking about EU funds, and then going to talk a bit about the waste policy and the climate energy policies, and then conclude shortly. So when it comes to the EU budget and financing of waste incineration, then I think we can be we can say that we have a de facto moratorium on waste incineration. So all the big funds, such as Regional Development Fund, but also Just Transition Fund, the Recovery and Resilience Fund, have phased out funding of waste incineration. At least, well, I mean, we know that there's sometimes there are discussion of non-compliance, but in practice, that should be the case. And we are talking really about big pots of money here. For example, the Cohesion Fund during the current period has funded more than 5 billion euros in waste management, and roughly half of it went into building incineration capacities. So it's all this is should no longer be the case anymore. When it comes to the Recovery and Resilience Fund, then there is actually specific guidance from the Commission where on the non-compliance with the so-called do no significant harm criteria, which makes investing in waste incineration non-compliant with the funding. But of course, we know that this is a very complex process, and sometimes there are some member states trying to still include waste incineration in there, but it should not be anymore the case. And we know that the European Commission has highlighted this non-compliance issue, and several member states had to revise their national plans for getting this so-called COVID funding to build back the economies. I think one of the important new legislations or new policies is the work that the Commission is doing currently on the taxonomy regulation and the accompanying delegated acts. And I know that Sirpa has been working on this very much. And so the taxonomy regulation aims to build a EU classification system for what can be considered sustainable. And it also introduced so-called do no significant harm criteria. And fortunately, the increase of incineration or disposal of waste is considered as significantly harming the circular economy. And this is very important because this is something that both the EU but also the member states have to follow in their future policy making. But of course, we know EU is also quite well known for its lack of coherence sometimes. So we do hope that this is going to happen in future policy making. So I just wanted to say that so the only funding that we see which is still left is exactly to do with carbon capture and saving, because it's not related directly to waste incineration, but potentially waste incinerations could also apply for funding. And we know that there are cases such as in, for example, Oslo plant, and Copenhagen plant have applied for funding to build a carbon capture and saving next to the facilities. We do not think this is a way forward for different reasons. So first of all, carbon capture and savings will increase the costs of waste incineration. Waste incineration is already very expensive, which is creating a lock-in effect. And adding even more costs, because carbon capture and saving is very, very expensive, would even further contribute to this lock-in effect in waste incineration. Because once you have something very, very expensive, it's very difficult to move away from it. It's the same issue with what we see with the district heating, for example. After having invested 100 million euros, it's very difficult to disconnect waste incineration plants from this system. We also think carbon capture and saving will have very limited use, particularly because, as I said, there are some places where maybe carbon capture and savings could potentially make sense, where you have groups of facilities pooling money together. We are talking about billions of euros to build carbon capture, saving, storage and transport system. But most of those waste incineration facilities, we are talking about more than 500 euro, they would not be able to connect this into this system. It's simply very, very expensive. So even if you mandated carbon capture and savings on incinerators, very few of them would be able actually to do it. Finally, even maybe perhaps more importantly, when it comes to discussions on do we have avoidable CO2 from burning waste, then when we look at what ends up in residual waste, then most of it can be recovered and should be recovered. And this would have many more, much higher climate benefits than trying to attach carbon capture and saving systems to it. Finally, I would say that when it comes to the EU funds, then we recommend to focus on material recovery and biological treatment of residual waste, which is much less carbon intensive. And as I already mentioned, it would have better benefits in terms of recycling more materials. So that's where the EU funds should focus on. And I think at least one of the funds have already started doing it, which is the Regional Development and Cohesion Fund. So let's move on to the EU waste policy. Unfortunately, the current focus when it comes to the residual waste is very much on limiting landfilling rather than residual waste. So we, when we look at the EU policy, it has really two targets at the moment. One is about landfilling, and another one is about recycling. And this is not really helpful. And particularly, it's not very helpful not to have a residual waste target, because the problem is not landfilling, but actually the fact that we produce a lot of residual waste. And particularly, I would like to highlight the problem with the 10% landfill target. I have here an image of a cookie and a cake. And as you can see, it doesn't matter how much waste you produce, as long as you only are allowed to landfill 10%. And it doesn't really make sense. So it's just imagine if you produce 800 kilos of waste, and then you're allowed to landfill 80 kilos of waste. But if you do much more about waste prevention and reuse and reduction, and produce maybe only about 300 kilos of waste, you're only allowed to landfill 30 kilos of it. So it doesn't really make sense, and it's really actually only encouraging more waste incineration. So what we recommend is, as I said already, to address this issue by setting a residual waste target. We propose to have 120 kilogram per capita by 2030 and 100 kilos per capita by 2035. And this goes very much in line with what the Commission is proposing. The Commission is proposing currently to halve the residual waste by 2030. And this is like, if you look at the country like Germany, Germany produces around 200 kilos, so half of it would be exactly around 100 kilos of waste. So it should not be impossible. And also, as I said, we also propose to change the 10% target to a kilograms-based target in order to make the waste prevention at the core of the landfilling target. And so to move away from the percentages and talk about how much actually in kilos is landfilled. It makes the whole difference. Okay, so I just wanted to quickly mention also that when it comes to the EU policies that go in that direction, then one of the important files was the Parliament's opinion report on the Circular Economy Action Plan that now already called for minimizing waste incineration. It also called for defining a new common EU-wide approach for the management of residual municipal waste in order to avoid building overcapacity of waste incineration. And also, very importantly, it called for the Commission to propose targets to cap the generation of residual waste. So we very much hope that the Commission is listening to us and will follow up on this. So finally, I just wanted to say also a few words about the EU climate and energy policies. Unfortunately, the focus of EU climate and energy policy has been very much on what happens at the very end of the waste. So it's end of life waste treatment. And there are quite a number of confusing and contradicting things. One of the first things is that when we talk about limiting emissions from landfill, from the waste sector, really, we talk about landfilling and waste incineration without energy recovery. And while most of the emissions currently are happening in the energy sector, where the waste incineration with energy recovery is included. So we are really talking about moving emissions from one sector to another and celebrating the fact, falsely celebrating the fact that we are reducing emissions from the waste sector, while actually we are just moving the emissions from one sector to another. So this should be, this should be changed. There are also other policies that are not particularly helpful. One of the things is the Renewable Energy Directive, which was just reviewed in 2018, which still allows energy from mixed waste. Of course, it's only focused on organic waste, but still by burning mixed waste and calculating the benefits of the part which come from organic fraction is sort of supported. And this is not particularly helpful because it indirectly also supports burning of mixed waste. And this should be, this is not very helpful. Even though the revised directive does say that only incinerations could be only supported if separate collection obligations are met. But I think it's not enough. Another thing I wanted to quickly mention is the current review of emission trading system. It's the system which covers the industrial facilities, about 50,000 facilities that are the most polluting. And currently there is an exemption for fossil emissions from waste incineration, particularly municipal waste incineration, which is the largest number of facilities. We talk about over 500 facilities in Europe, are not included and not paying for the fossil emissions. So what we recommend is that we need to fix the accounting of emissions. So there has to be a recognition of waste incineration emissions also under the waste sector, so that we can actually really have a full picture of what is happening, rather than being hidden away under the energy sector. It's very difficult to find out the exact emissions, also for the reasons that there's a lack of transparency and member states don't really properly report the emissions. Then when it comes to the Renewable Energy Directive, which is also being reviewed again now, then we propose that it should support any kind of hybrid sources. So only allow energy from separately collected or segregated organics. And this way actually help with separate collection of bio-wastes. And then finally, also we strongly recommend to include municipal solid waste incinerators in the scope of the emissions trading system, in order to make them responsible for the fossil CO2 emissions. Plus also this will strongly encourage better waste management, particularly better separate collection, more recycling, and also in the meanwhile, recovery of those materials, particularly plastics from the residual waste stream. So yeah, I think I can just conclude very quickly. I think there is already moratorium when it comes to EU financing on incinerators, and we should particularly pay attention on funding for solutions such as carbon capture and savings. When it comes to waste policy, we need to move away from limiting landfills to limiting residual waste. I think this is the only way. And then we need to also change the landfill target to strengthen the waste prevention part. And finally, when it comes to climate energy, then we need to fix the greenhouse gas accounting to give more visibility on the emissions from waste incinerators. And we need to align our climate energy policies to phase out any support to actions that undermine the waste hierarchy. So yeah, so that's it. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yannick. Really good overview of everything relevant that's happening at the EU policy level. There are some questions at the Q&A, but they are rather general. So I just want to reassure those that have put forward these questions that we're going to pick them up at the Q&A general after all the presentations. And I'd like to focus now just on questions, clarification questions for Yannick. And I see that actually there are many, and I'm gonna take this chance to move us forward actually, because we are running a bit late, and we're gonna, we want to save time for all these very good questions that we've received for the general Q&A after the presentation of Enzo, which is gonna be the last one, the last presentation of today. Great, so Enzo Favorino. Enzo is the scientific coordinator at Zero Waste Europe. Enzo is a technical expert as well and researcher at the Scuola Agraria del Parco di Monza and has decades of experience of separate waste collection, recycling, composting, and prevention. He is an expert in EU waste legislation and is highly knowledgeable in the field of European policymaking. He's one of the founders of the European Compost Network and the coordinator of the scientific committee at the Zero Waste Research Center in Italy. Thanks a lot, Enzo, for being with us today. And please, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Marielle. Can you hear me and can you see my slides?
Brilliant, perfect.
All set up. Wonderful. Okay, good morning, everybody. Mine will be the easiest task because before me I had three outstanding presentations by renowned speakers. And well, we are just putting the icing on the cake because we are zero wasters and therefore we want to minimize residual waste. But residual waste management must be part of the picture because while we pave our way towards zero waste, we need to deal with residuals, which transitionally is there because we are improving and optimizing our separate collection systems, our reduction programs, pay-as-you-throw, deposit return schemes, and so on and so forth. So we need a bridge. We need a bridge towards a better future. If I may go on with my slides. Okay. We know by now that incineration is impacting climate change. And in turn, we said that there is a changing climate for incineration. Because definitely in the last few years, we had a U-turn regarding European policy on incineration. The European Union hasn't banned incineration, but indeed, there is a huge call for defunding incineration and for considering something else before even planning for incineration. Because we have got the amounts of residual waste which are being minimized by the circular economy programs, by the ongoing programs in order to achieve the 65% net recycling preparation for recycling and reuse as it is worded in European Union by 2035. And we've already got hundreds, I would say thousands, municipalities, communities, waste management districts, well above 70, 80, and even 90% separate collection. We have got the European communication, probably the main turning point on European policy on incineration from January 2017, which was also supplemented locally by the communication, the document, which was prepared, by the way, by Eunomia for Tema Nord, which is the network of Scandinavian ministries of environment. And both are exposing the lock-in effect. So the problem, once you invest in incineration, you're bound to produce residual waste in order to feed the beast. That's the main problem of incineration. And therefore, both are calling for defunding incineration and for planning a phased decommissioning plan in order to realign the needed capacities for incineration with the dwindling amounts of residual waste. Then, as it was beautifully explained by Janek, we have got all the latest European provisions regarding grants, funds, and so on and so forth. They have excluded incineration. This covers the regional funds, the Just Transition funds, the European taxonomy of sustainable finance, the recovery funds, and so on and so forth. Let's keep in mind that the do not significant harm principle, which explicitly exposes the lack of cross-consistency between incineration and circular economy. And also we know from the beautiful presentation by William, the problem of the carbon footprint of energetic production, which is getting lower and lower. And therefore incineration is becoming an outlier in our paths towards decarbonization. We have got a common commitment towards a carbon neutral Europe by 2050. And in that respect, we have got a net carbon burden whenever we incinerate anything. This is why in many areas there is already an age of decommissioning. And many areas, they have given up the plans to build incinerators. The most outstanding case was Slovenia so far, the Ljubljana incinerator. And not by chance, Slovenia has become the most the front runner worldwide when it comes to separate collection, recycling, waste reduction, and so on and so forth. However, let's go on. Yannick already drew our attention that the problem is not landfilling per se, but it's overproduction of residual waste. In other words, we cannot afford a wasteful circular economy. And if we rank, unfortunately, too often we discuss percentages. You may remember the cookie and the cake example, which was emphasized by Yannick. But sometimes we have to consider that we produce waste in terms of kilograms and tons, and we landfill or incinerate in terms of kilograms and tons. And the most wasteful country, according to official data sets in Europe, is Denmark. Denmark, the country with the highest reliance on incineration, even more than some tourist islands as Cyprus and Malta. So even net of what is being sent to incineration, which is roughly 50% currently in Denmark, they are incinerating 420 kilograms. And if you consider the share of slugs and ashes, this makes a staggering amount of more than 100 kilograms per inhabitant and year, slugs and ashes. Yes, part of the slugs may be recycled, but still the fly ashes, they have to be landfilled. Well, we have got many zero waste programs which have already achieved less than 50 kilograms per inhabitant and year residual waste. So definitely incineration is not a way to minimize residual waste and landfilling. Also, this is already, it was brought up by William, the problem with the carbon footprint of incineration. Well, William, he made a note, which is important, that was specifically related to the UK situation, but the situation in Europe as a whole isn't much different, because we have got this commitment to full decarbonization by 2050. We have got the preparation for reuse and recycling targets by 2035 at 65%, which is basically aligned with the targets and commitments in the United Kingdom. And if we describe it another way, already now in most parts of Europe, the carbon footprint of incineration, as you can see from this chart, is much higher than the carbon footprint of the average energetic mix in most parts of Europe. This is why we say, look, with the current commitments towards decarbonization, using incineration will create a net burden in our efforts towards decarbonization. And the situation will only get worse because during its lifetime, the energy produced through incineration will replace less and less fossil sources and more renewable sources, which doesn't make sense, of course. This, by the way, is why the Danish government lately committed to a phase-out plan for 30% of its incineration capacity, just because there is plastics, and plastics are concentrated in the non-packaging plastics. We have got in Europe extended producer responsibility and specific separate collection programs for the packaging plastics. But the non-packaging plastics are concentrated in residual waste, and the higher the separate collection level, the higher the percentage of plastics in residual waste. So the higher the carbon footprint of incineration. There was a similar move by the regional government in Lombardy. Lombardy is the most populated region in Italy. Back in 2014, the total population in Lombardy is 10 million inhabitants. And well, Lombardy is already around 72% separate collection. There is a huge incineration capacity. And by now, there is already a problem with the lack of alignment between the incineration capacity and the further efforts to further increase separate collection rates. So back in 2014, the regional government adopted unanimously a decommissioning plan from incineration. Unfortunately, it only sets the common principle, Whereas there was no calendar to start with the oldest incinerators. And so it relies on the goodwill by the owners of incinerators. And sometimes the goodwill is missing. Let's go on. So what else if not incineration? We did, as it was already mentioned by Janek, this report on material recovery and biological treatment. It was including also a survey on the way that the obligation on pretreatment was stipulated in different domestic legislation in different member states, because sometimes it is misbased. For instance, in many countries, they say, okay, we will ban high calorific value materials from landfilling. But this, of course, is only promoting incineration. And that provision is not stipulated in the landfill directive. Many countries, they just say, okay, we copied from the German legislation because it is in the directive, but it is not in the directive. Also, we were trying to seek alignment between the circular economy agenda and the management of residuals in order to keep the system flexible. Because first and foremost, we want to keep working towards zero waste, which means increasing and optimizing separate collection, reuse programs, waste reduction initiatives, and so on and so forth. These all needs flexibility. And the main problem with incineration is the lack of flexibility in the system. And we wanted to define a suitable operational approach, subsequently, that ensures compliance while keeping the system flexible. In a single sentence, we want to meet the obligations of today, but with no prejudice for the ambition of tomorrow. We always have to keep this in mind. So we started with surveying what's in residual waste in a few highly performing situations. Ljubljana is the national capital of Slovenia, currently by far the national capital with the highest recycling rates. Milan is currently the city with a population above 1 million inhabitants, with by far the highest separate collection rate, currently between 65 and 70%, because in both there was a consistent program to tackle the organics as well, besides the dry recyclables. And once again, the organics are the trigger towards the highest recycling rates. But what is the effect? What is not captured by separate collection systems concentrates in residual waste. We call it the concentration effect in residual waste. So we may have as much as 20 to 30% paper and cardboard, 11 to 20%, 10 to 20% mixed plastics. And these are sometimes even valuable polymers, such as rigid plastics, as those ones which are used in toys, for instance. Whereas the percentage of bio-waste is dwindling because of the consistent programs to tackle the organics. And this is a precondition which makes it easier to sort out materials from residual waste. It is important because the residual waste will be less dirty, less sticky, and therefore it's easier to sort out valuable materials. So what may be a basic operational layout of an MRBT site, material recovery and biological treatment site? It blends a sorting section by means of ballistic separators, optical sorters, magnetic separators, eddy current separators for ferrous and non-ferrous materials, and a biological stabilization section. With the biological stabilization section, we want to aerobically degrade the dirty organics so that they do not produce methane once landfill, and this minimizes the impacts of landfill, of course. But the most important is that since we do have both sorting systems and biological treatment systems, these may flexibly adapt to increasing separate collection rates, because with more organics being separately collected, more plastic being separately collected, we may use such systems for more and more clean materials coming from separate collection and decreasing amounts of residual waste, still keeping the financial balance in the system. A few remarks anyway, because we do not have the silver bullet. The silver bullet is separate collection, circular economy, reuse systems, DRS, pay as you throw, and something like that. This is a system, residual waste management is only the icing on the cake to supplement the good actions we have to do at the higher levels of the hierarchy in order to keep the system flexible. We have got recovery of materials, which is already fairly diffused in many residual waste sites, including incinerators. in most incinerators, if not all of them, at least they sort out metals. And as William was making the case for sorting plastics, there is the possibility to sort plastics out. So if it can be done before an incinerator, it may as well be done before a landfill. It works. The technology is there, and the minimized amounts and percentages of organics inside residual waste make it even more possible. The recovery rates, anyway, are not fundamental because we always prioritize separate collections. So as a paradox, we would like to have the least percentage, the least amount of valuable materials in residual waste. But the most important is that by means of material recovery and biological treatment, we minimize tonnages going to landfills because we may recover further materials, we degrade part of the dirty organics, but above all, waste to landfills is stabilized, so it does not produce methane anymore, while fossil carbon, greenhouse gases are not released because we do not burn plastics and synthetic textiles. And that's it. This is why it performs better than incineration in terms of climate change. So the last bit is about a call to action, because we have got a problem, and we called it the 10% nightmare, the landfill cap. This was already consistently addressed by Janek in the previous presentation. Unfortunately, this is triggering a distorted approach to mid and long-term planning because in many districts, they are already planning right now, right here and right now, on a misleading calculation, 100 minus 65, the recycling target, minus 10%, the landfill cap. And so this is promoting more incineration capacity. And so it's at risk of working against the circular economy. So it should be redefined in order to align with the circular economy agenda and vision. For instance, our proposal is from in any given year, let's switch to relative to a baseline. So we blend in the calculation, the magic effect of waste reduction. Or let's consider kilograms per person instead of a percentage. Because the problem is not landfilling, the problem is overproduction of residual waste. Thanks God, the European Parliament, kudos to the European Parliament, because last February they voted on the Circular Economy Action Programme, and it called on the European Commission to revise the landfill cap, not to promote incineration, and to revise the landfill cap in a way that it includes also the possible effects of waste reduction. So that will be important because, as we already said back in 2014, so on the average, it takes 7 years for good ideas to come up in European policy at European level. It may be worse. So I'm happy to stay in Europe because 7 years is not a long time frame in terms of geology or a one man's life. However, we already in 2014, we called on the European institutions to set a residual waste target. And as you can see, Slovenia is showing the way because they did not build the incinerator, they keep working on circular economy, they keep working on waste reduction, they are fully deploying the full potential of circular economy, and they became from one of the laggards because they are a Central Eastern European country. So they joined the European Union back in 2004, and they were at around 2-3% separate collection. Then they have become the worldwide leaders in separate collection, recycling, waste reduction, and circular economy as a whole. So keep working the good direction, and remember our principle is always let's slim the bin. So not landfilling, but the bin. We have to slim the bin. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Enzo. Always brilliant and a pleasure to hear from you and have your wisdom. So we are now going to take maybe a couple of questions for Enzo, any clarification questions. And actually in the Q&A chat box, we do have a couple that I think are really appropriate for you, Enzo. There is one which I know that you are an expert about the pay as you throw. So someone working for the local council saying that considering the idea of pay as you throw, are there any negatives that come from this? What impact for lower income workers or anything like this that should be considered? And actually, I'm gonna highlight that there's a similar question from Victor Hugo in Brazil, where they're also campaigning for separation of organics and composting, but there's always the question of, is it going to be more expensive, and whether how pay as you throw policies could be helpful for that.
Yeah, this is a great question. Of course, this is not a webinar on pay as you throw. I'm very much looking forward to one. Of course, there's so much to be said. Well, this is becoming fairly widespread, above all in Central Europe, but for instance, even in Italy, we've already got 1,500 municipalities implementing pay as you throw. There are different systems to implement it. Some are based on a renting program, depending on the volume and the collection frequency of the system. Most of them, they are based on the number of set-outs a year or a month. So if you set out your residual waste only 5 times a year, you will pay less. If you set it out 10 times or 15 times, you will pay more. Well, in a nutshell, anyway, we have got consistent evidence that those areas where pay as you throw has been implemented in typical European conditions, where landfilling is expensive because we have got an obligation on pretreatment of whatever gets into a landfill. Incineration is expensive because it cannot thrive on the European grants anymore. And we do know that the last tendered incinerators were adopting at a business plan a gate fee of 100, 150, sometimes even 200 euros a ton. So the more you recycle, the less waste you produce, the less you will pay. In typical European conditions, pay as you throw leads to the least cost transferred to the taxpayers. Then, of course, it depends on individual responsibility. Those who are producing more waste will pay more. Those who are producing less waste will pay less. So this is a chance for poor people to pay less, being more mindful on, but normally poor people, they are more mindful on management of materials because they do know the value of materials. Also, if I may top it up, sometimes the concern regarding pay as you throw is that many decision makers, they say, well, if we implement pay as you throw, then much of the waste will end up in the countryside or in the woods. There is a very simple trick. Actually, in pay as you throw, there is a fixed part of the fee and a variable part of the fee. The variable part of the fee is the only one that rewards good behavior, whereas the fixed part of the fee is intended to cover the fixed cost in the system, because you may be the best recycler in the world, but I have to pass by with my truck and my employees to check whether or not you are setting out your residual waste. And this is a fixed cost. But also, the good consequence of that is that if you keep the variable part of the fee at the proper level, it will be high enough to promote good behavior, but small enough to prevent bad behavior. Or otherwise speaking, if it is a matter of saving a few euros a year, it will work. If it is a matter of saving hundreds of euros a year, probably people will be, pushed into thinking about how to cheat in order to save more. So we need a balance. Pushing on the gas and the brakes is in every system.
Thank you, Enzo. There are lots of questions for all panelists, and I'm gonna go on to them. But before, I'm gonna take one more for Enzo, which it'd be great if you could have a look. It's about the Europe statistics on recycling from the OECD and Eurostat. Someone is saying that there are some people are saying that there's the waste to energy and composting data are in the same database, that some of that is included in energy recovery. The question is, do you feel this data on recycling is trustable, is reliable?
No, it is not. No, I do agree. Yeah, unfortunately, yeah, we always have to sift through the Eurostat data. We know we do not put the blame on Eurostat. It's the way data are being reported by single member states. Thanks God, now we will have unified calculation method, thanks to the European Commission implementing decision on preparation for reuse and recycling. So we will know what is actual net recycling in each and every member state. Unfortunately, so far there were quite a few factual mistakes, such as considering the compost-like outputs from MBT as recycling, which will not be possible anymore in the near future because of one of the provisions of the Waste Framework Directive. But so for the moment, we try to dig into the specific national data sets and see the way they have been compiled in order to understand what may be trusted and what may not be trusted. But anyway, more or less, roughly, we do know what are the countries with the highest separate collection rates. That's more trustworthy, separate collection rate. But when it comes to recovery, sometimes it takes in something, sometimes it does not, and so on and so forth. There was a question regarding lock-in with MRBT. May I quickly address that?
Please
Yes,
do.
actually, that was included in my presentation when I said it's the flexibility of the site itself that does not cause any lock-in, because we have got composting technologies in that. We use it first for dirty organics to minimize production of methane from landfills. And then we can use it for the clean organics from separate collections. So with the very same capacity, we will deal with more clean organics and less residual waste. And the same for the dry recyclables. In the beginning, we will have more dry recyclables in residual waste, then we may implement or optimize, improve separate collection. And so we will have more materials coming from separate collection and less materials in residual waste. So the system is flexible on itself.
Great, thank you, Enzo. So I'm gonna take a question now for Mrs. Pietikainen. There is one here for you asking, what do you expect the Parliament to put forward to phase out incineration? Is there anything already in the works? Sirpa, Mrs. Pietikainen, well, maybe we have some...
I have a problem of unmuting myself. Sorry about it.
That's fine.
My iPad decided it's better that I stay quiet, silent. But anyway, it is still a sort of very big fight in the Parliament, because there are those ones not willing landfilling, those ones not willing incineration, those ones that are the municipality in general waste party who doesn't want to touch about the topic, and those ones who want to still enhance the incineration. This especially comes from the municipal waste party and energy firms, as you might guess, that it is better to burn than. And I was very happy to hear so. And you might know that I've been trying to proceed this kind of an overall compromise that yes, the incineration has its place, but we have already now overcapacity. If you look how the scene should look like after 5 or not 5, well, let's say from 5 to 20 years from now, when drastically smaller amounts are going to incineration or landfilling. And so what I would like to see is this kind of advanced looking municipalities and incinerators to come together with zero waste and other NGOs and to make this kind of a together lobby. Because I hear from the individual talks and today that we are thinking very much in line. That okay, in the meantime, incineration, but why don't you have the hierarchy to there too, that first you need to separate collect, then you need to sort, and you need to have on the spot the best sorting, optical or whatever sorting possibilities. And then you really incinerate the residue you can't sort by any other ways. And then you could actually, it would be better to create the secure and traceable waste shippings within the Europe. And there we have had the problem too, that it was supposed to go on this kind of a reliable incineration place, but then actually when you tracked it down, it never happened. So the tracking system should be in place. And then the bigger goals, what we discussed, should go on upfront. And I don't know if you could create, or we could create that kind of a common message that would be balanced. And this was, I think, that what we tried to achieve in the parliament's position, and one part of it was, but not very successfully worded. I take the blame on me, that we would call the landfills temporary storages also, because some part we probably do need to landfill in the future too, because you do not have any better treatment, and it's if there's a lot of toxic chemicals and substances, it might be in some cases better to landfill than to incinerate. But then we do know that there's a lot of materials we could reuse, and sort of incinerating all that stuff in the meantime actually doesn't make sense. Sorry for a lengthy answer, but I think that if we would really put the pieces together, it would make a lot of sense, and would give actually better business for responsible incineration and landfilling, and then kick off the future for non-waste, or this mythical 5 or maximum 10% of residual waste target in the longer run. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Sirpa, for your answer. I would like to share a reflection that has come up in the chat box. It's a reminder and a comment from Dan, and he's saying that as in Europe is effectively restricting incineration, still European institutions and countries are promoting incineration in South America for sure, but also we know in other regions in the global South. Here's an important reminder of some European double standards that we see in our global work. Any reflections on that? Just an open question to all, a reflection. Just about how important this is.
May I jump in?
Please.
Unless anybody else wants, I'd not like to be overly, however, yes, we know that, and unfortunately, most of the incineration plants are being fueled by the clean development mechanisms, let alone in Asia and Africa. This is a contradiction, and there is a paradox, because we have to emphasize that in municipal solid waste, there is a much higher percentage of organics outside Europe. And so this minimizes the calorific value of mixed municipal solid waste. So really, the energetic efficiency of incineration is least in those countries. Also, we have to consider that also the energetic efficiency of incineration in Europe is between 20 and 25%. And the only way to increase it is to include some district heating, which is a further problem, because then you have got a further locking effect, because you have got a district heating system which you need to feed with a source of heat. But district heating is to no use in most parts of the world. And so it is fully nonsense to consider incineration in many parts of the world, really.
Great. Yes. Thank you so much. Maybe we take a general question about we have here how realistic it is to decommission existing incineration plants given the cost and the municipal contracts that are in place, and unfortunately they are tied up and lock in local authorities. It seems that the industry is promoting the carbon capture, but how can we do this?
Yeah, maybe I can, unless somebody else wants to.
Thank you.
Just indeed I think waste management sector is normally has some, as Enzo calls it, laziness in it. So things don't happen overnight. So I think the way of doing is when the facilities need to be revamped, because every around 15 years you need to modernize those facilities. and those investments are significant. And this is a big chance actually invest in something else. So I would say we have to look at when those facilities need to be modernized or closed down, and that's a really big opportunity. Yeah, to move away and to do something else. Because unfortunately, yeah, if you build a facility now, it's going to be there. Because you put maybe 300 million, 400 million, 500 millions. Very expensive. And well, I don't know if on the carbon capture, I think so. Yeah, as I said, I do not think this should be the way, particularly when it comes to managing residual waste. I think we need to really focus on minimizing the kind of waste that we don't want to have. I think maybe, yeah, I don't know if Sirpa, you want to add anything on that, but yeah, basically, I think there are so many much more savings from doing better waste management. We recently published our opinion on, for example, on the revision of emission trading system, and just capturing the organics which still ends up in there will have so many more greenhouse gas savings than investing in carbon capture, and for much less money. So I think we really need to focus first on the solution part before we start talking about unavoidable CO2. I don't think it's the proper word when it comes to waste.
Great, thank you, Yannick. We just have a few more minutes, and there are many questions, sorry, in the chat box. So I'd like to encourage the panelists to have a look, and some of them are quite technical. So if you could have a look and reply in writing, that would be great. I don't know if in these last minutes we can, you have any highlights. We haven't heard from William. Any final reflections that you want to share with the audience?
No, not particularly. I've tackled a couple of the questions in the chat box related specifically to my presentation. So if anyone wants to check those out or ask any further ones, I'm happy to correspond via email as well.
Yeah. Okay.
Marielle, if I may, I would really take the chance to call for, particularly for the Commission, but also the European Parliament, to start working more on the residual waste limitations and a little bit forget about the landfill, because I think we will need to limit residual waste. And let's not distract from us how to fill it, but mostly to limit it. And another thing, I think, which is very important also, we have to make those things more expensive. At the moment, we only have a limitation on landfilling. We don't have a limitation, any kind of limitation, or even incineration. We need to make it also more expensive to encourage investments in reuse and recycling. We know that very little investments are being made in for example, in mechanical recycling. There is a lack of feedstock in Europe. The only way of diverting plastics to better recycling is to make those things end-of-pipe solutions more expensive. So yeah.
Thank you, Yannick. Any final remarks, Sirpa?
Yes, very briefly, just about this CCS. No, I do not support it, and I find it this kind of an extra loop how you want to justify increasing incineration and to make it greener than it is, just to make it, it's a bit like the chemical recycling, a loophole that we should close. Some of its definition. And secondly, yes, I agree that we should have higher targets for reuse and still some improvement on definition, what is regarded as reuse and what is regarded as recycling. And then that goes to overall the targets on the material efficiency or reuse or recycling. and there should be the big focus. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Sirpa. Well, thanks to everyone for being here today. Just some closing reminders to continue, learn more in this discussion. Please have a look at our website at zerowasteeuropecities.eu. There's a tool section where you'll find all these presentations and many more resources. And you can also sign up to the Zero Waste Cities newsletter to know more about upcoming webinars. Thank you everyone for being here today. Thanks so much to the panelists for your excellent contributions. Best of all for everyone managing and adapting through still these somehow difficult times. See you here